What's up YouTube, this is Pollo for Heroes of Fandom. It's insane to think that the Game Boy is now 30 years old. We've come a long way from the days of monochrome, no backlight, green screen, blurry 4AA's gaming. While the original Game Boy may not have aged as well as some of us might recall, the games are a whole different story. While the Game Boy was plagued with low quality budget versions of games that were available for home consoles, many original titles began on the Game Boy and its upgrade, the Game Boy Color. For today's video, we're going to go over my personal top 15 favorite games. Quick side note before we begin, there is no one entry per franchise rule. It just wouldn't be fair to list the game as number 7 if it would have otherwise been number 20. And this list will include Game Boy Color games as well. I always saw the Game Boy Color as an upgrade for the Game Boy rather than a whole new system like the Advance or the DS. So without further delay, this is Pollo's Heroes of Fandom Top 15 Game Boy Games. Number 15. So this one's kind of an odd choice when you think about it. Pokemon the Trading Card video game is based on Pokemon the Trading Card game, which is based on Pokemon the video game. While the argument could be made that if you're playing the Trading Card video game, why not just play the actual card game? To which I say, did you ever try collecting these cards? Now that I'm an adult, I realize just how much money my parents sunk into buying us booster packs. Dad, I'm so sorry. Pokemon TCG, the video game, eliminates all the needless spending by allowing you to receive extra cards by winning battles in-game. And if you have a friend with a copy of the game and a link cable, you can go head-to-head and not have to worry about losing to the rich kid whose parents could afford to just keep buying them booster packs. Everything that holds true about the real-life trading card game holds up in the video game as well. As you go around dueling randos, you build your deck to take on the club leaders who will give you badges so that you can ultimately become the very best like no one ever was. The only drawback is that because it's a video game, later cards added to the game obviously won't be present here, but the game is so much fun as it is, you probably wouldn't notice unless you're still actively following the game. Number 14. It may have Mario in the title, but this isn't a Mario game. Despite this, some people will judge this as one of the worst Mario games, but let's be honest, that's only because it's not. It's a puzzle game, and an addicting one at that. For those who don't know what Picross is, the aim of the game is to reveal some kind of basic image, which can be like a helicopter, scissors, or a flower. You do this by looking at the numbers on the sides. So think kind of like Sudoku in that you gotta look at everything. Think ahead and be careful as you mark down your tiles or else you can really screw yourself over down the line. Fortunately, Mario's Picross has a penalty system so you don't have to worry about marking down the wrong tile and having it come back to haunt you. For a dummy like me, this works because unless you're some kind of Sudoku puzzle wizard, you sometimes gotta take a guess. This game is incredibly addicting and I consider it a bit of a hidden gem. Whenever I have heard about it, it's mostly only negativity, but let's be honest, it's just because it has Mario in the title and it's not really a Mario game. Number 13. Before finding mainstream success with the inclusion of Pit in Super Smash Bros., there were only two Kid Icarus games. Kid Icarus on NES and the sequel of Myths and Monsters on Game Boy. If we had to be real, this is just a downgraded version of the NES version with a few quality of life improvements here and there. Instead of dealing with passwords to save, you get a battery-saved adventure. Instead of getting a wide screen with plenty of color, you get a smaller field of view with no color. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. The progression is very similar to the NES game as well. You start off in stages that have you traveling upwards, a side-scroller, and then more going up. But despite the similarities, it's still one of the most enjoyable games on the handheld and a very welcomed experience to the relatively small lines of games involving Pit. If you're a fan of the original and haven't played through this one, it's well worth checking out. My only complaint is that the dungeons can be tricky to get through unless you draw your own maps, but other than that, the game is much more forgiving than NES Kid Icarus. Number 12. This is where it starts getting legendary. Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 is by far one of the worst titled games on this list, but it's also one of the most enjoyable ones. The premise revolves around Wario, who just got his butt kicked in Super Mario Land 2. To get revenge and show off that he really is better than Mario, Wario sets off to kidnap a golden statue of Princess Totsu, which was stolen by the Brown Sugar Pirates. Gameplay is much different from a Mario game. Running into enemies doesn't necessarily hurt you unless they have some kind of pointed object. The main challenge comes in the form of getting as many coins as you can, which will determine the ending that you get. Hidden throughout the land are secret exits and treasures, so you'll be spending a lot of time with this one if you want to get the best possible outcome for the antihero. Of course, being the first in a long line of games means that there's gonna be a lot of little things here and there that show off the game's age. For one, Wario moves incredibly slow and the graphics aren't particularly easy on the eyes. But on the plus side, Wario does have a ton of fun power-ups to play with. When it comes to Game Boy, Wario outshines Mario. Number 11. Pokemon Red and Blue are iconic and amazing games, just not quite enough to crack the top 10. While many link Tetris to being the game to move the most Game Boys, I give that recognition to the first Pokemon game. I mean, yeah, Tetris was influential, but Pokemon blasted into this world like a cannon and would completely shake up the handheld market. Pokemon isn't just a brand anymore, it's a lifestyle, and it started with this one. With 150 unique monsters to collect and train, Gen 1 Pokemon was as simple as it got. The most complicated way to evolve Pokemon involved trading in stones, whereas later games would come to introduce much more complex ways of getting different Pokemon to evolve. There was no time cycle, there was no holding items, and there were no personalities. This simplicity is one of the reasons why many people consider this to be their favorite game in the series. Some argue that the monsters were amongst the most inspired. Some argue that they were the best designed. I'd say a bit of nostalgia may play a role, but then again, there was no standard back then. They could create whatever monsters and there was no pressure to live up to expectations. Nowadays, it must be hard to come up with anything knowing that the worst modern Pokemon will be compared to the best of the best from the past. Designs in Gen 1 were simple and it just feels right. As for why Pokemon Gen 1 is placed so low on this list, relatively speaking, despite all the praise I've been giving it, is simply because I'm not a huge Pokemon guy. All my enjoyment of it stems mostly from nostalgia. Amazing game, just not top 10 material for me. Number 10. Now here's the opposite, a game that's got a lot of problems, but man do I love this game. There's so much you can say about the first Shantae game. We can talk about how it was released well after the Game Boy Advance was already out, leading to low sales, and now the game demands absurd prices on eBay. We can talk about how gorgeous the game looks, fluid animation, color, and character design. Being released so late into the Game Boy Color's lifespan meant that you had a team that knew how to maximize the system's capabilities. We can talk about how this game went on to garner a huge cult following that continues to go strong. We can talk about that music, or we can talk about the not so good. Shantae is what the peeps in the community call a Metroidvania style game. When you set off on your quest, you can pretty much go anywhere as long as you have the right power-ups, which come in the form of animal transformations. You find these in dungeons, which are scattered throughout the world, figure out the puzzles that lie within, and come out stronger than when you went in, allowing you to now see more areas and find more secrets in this open world. It's a hit or miss design when it comes to these. Shantae has no map system, which means that unless you have an amazing memory or are taking notes, you're going to have a lot of moments of where do I go? It's not too bad, but it's worth mentioning because Game Boys didn't have the largest screens. So already having a limited field of vision was a general problem for games that didn't even have exploration. Second, Shantae's primary method of attacking is whipping her hair like, well, a whip, and it sucks. The range is too short, pretty slow, and enemies can take a ton of hits. Oftentimes I just found myself running away from some of the stronger baddies. Fortunately, you have magic spells that help give you an advantage, but compared to some of the later games in the series, the creators were still figuring it out. The sequels would be much more enjoyable in terms of gameplay. Once you get the animal transformations, there are ways to attack with them, but you have to find the attack power-up, which is hidden throughout the land. During my first playthrough, I completely missed some of these and or found them late into the game when it didn't really matter. So why do I rank this game over Pokemon? Well, it's a guilty pleasure. The atmosphere really does it in for me. The music, graphics, the humorous dialogue. Shantae is clearly a passion project, and if you're willing to overlook its shortcomings, there's a very rich and enjoyable experience underneath it all. While gameplay improved throughout the series, the charm has remained consistently great. Number 9. Oh yeah, Pokemon Puzzle Challenge is my jam. While I love this game to the max, it does get knocked down a couple pegs because it is just a remake of Tetris Attack on Super Nintendo. I mean, look at the two side by side, it's the exact same game, but with a Pokemon paint job. Come to think about it, Tetris Attack is just Panel de Pon but with a Yoshi paint job, and a lot less little girl. Anyway, Pokemon Puzzle Challenge is not your typical puzzle game like Tetris or Dr. Mario, games that involve blocks coming down. Instead, the blocks go up and it's your job to keep them from hitting the roof. And as the name Tetris Attack implies, it's a much more aggressive game. The highlight is a story mode, which has you making your way through the Pokemon Johto League, beating up all the gym leaders along the way. There's a ton of other modes, but nothing I would write home about. Battling in the game consists of making combos, and that's what I love about this game. In games like Dr. Mario, combos involve a lot of forward thinking. The blocks have to be set up just right before you can execute a chain. And while this is still true in Puzzle Challenge, while the blocks are disappearing, you can still move the pieces around, making for a much more hectic and engaging challenge. Skilled players will be pulling off 10 chain combos and absolutely annihilating the computer. Speaking of 10 chain combos, there are Pokemon that you can unlock by performing incredible achievements. Defeat an opponent before a certain amount of time, last longer than a certain amount of time, pulling off huge combos and chains. Doing this will give you the chance to fight a random rival who, upon defeat, will give you their Pokemon like some ashamed parent. It gives the game even more replayability, as some of these can be really difficult to pull off. It's a shame this series of games doesn't get as much love as the big names like Dr. Mario and Tetris. In my eyes, Pokemon Puzzle Challenge is a fine game and a perfect fit to the portable nature of the Game Boy. Number 8. Another game, or should it be games, with interesting history. The Oracle games were originally meant to be 3 different games that would carry your progression via passwords regardless of which game you started on. However, this proved to be too difficult to apply appropriately, so what we ended up with was Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. To get the full experience, you'd have to play both games, which is why I often see these games as just one game. Kinda like a Sonic 3 and Knuckles type deal, except here it doesn't matter where you start. Choices and actions you make in one game will carry over to the other, creating for 2 completely different ways to experience both games. On their own, the games are pretty weak compared to other Zelda games. Ages focuses on puzzles and Seasons focuses on action, so playing only one game will give you the best of one world. It just sucks that back in the day you would have had to pay full price for 2 games. Nowadays, you can download these games for much cheaper on the 3DS eShop, and I really recommend it. Combined, this feels like a handheld Zelda with console level proportions. Ages gives you a time travel gimmick, and Seasons lets you change the terrain from snowy winters and orange autumns to sunny summers and green springs. Overall, if you have a 3DS, you need to get both of them. There's just too much awesomeness to handle in one video, so we're cutting this up into 2 parts. Be sure to watch part 2 as we count down the top 7 Game Boy games.